ChatGPT and Gen AI tools have hit the mainstream. The chatter was everywhere, by almost everyone. We feel the discussion has been more philosophical than practical. We know enterprise technologists are using real AI to create efficiencies that result in real business outcomes. So, we created a show to talk to real practitioners about real-world active projects that are leveraging this exciting new technical advantage. Welcome to LiveAI.
Thanks for joining us for our first installment of LiveAI, sticking with the show's theme of real-life enterprise AI use cases. With me today is Preetha Sekharan, VP, Digital Incubator and Applied AI from Unum Group. Preetha, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here today.
Since the first part of this episode airs on LinkedIn, I'd love to cover first two things before we get into the bulk of our conversation. First, can you share with our audience the use case you'll be discussing with us today?
Yeah, I think I'll probably be talking about two use cases, so I may flip roundabout. First one is around how we have used AI to support our claims and benefits specialists in processing our short-term disability claims. And the second one is around customer retention. So how have we used our data and AI creatively to identify when and where a customer is likely to churn and how to save the customer?
Nice. Those are some great ones. How far are you into those use cases, and have you seen any results?
Oh yes. We're live with both of them. And we've already realized value on the first use case, and on the second one, we just saw some early results pour in the beginning of this year. But that's where we expect 50% of the churn to happen. So it's very, very indicative of the final outcome that we expect to see by the end of this year.
Tell us about the incubator Unum launched and your involvement in it.
Yeah, I think the story probably starts some 4 or 5 years ago, where if you think about a lot of projects that we do, we straight away plunge into execution mode without necessarily identifying what are kind of uncertainties in this project and how do we get ahead of those uncertainties, right? And how over a period of time with very intentional and scientific experiments, how do you test out concepts? How do you test out technologies and see whether they are desirable, feasible, viable for the specific use cases that you're trying to solve within the company? So that was really the genesis of Incubator within Unum. So think of it as, ideas have a way of dying before its time in larger organizations, and the function of the incubator team is to really protect and save those ideas so that they have a chance of showing their value and able to get some deep roots in the organization. So really provide that kind of an environment where you're willing to test out the ideas, you're willing to pivot very rapidly, and really give those ideas a chance to succeed.
Now, how does the business look at a team like that and decide to actually fund something? Were there key things that you had to overcome to convince a stakeholder somewhere? How did it actually come to be?
Yeah, I would say, we tried, our own Kool-Aid in terms of process, right? So start small. And it is a lot of times the proof of the pudding is in the doing. And so show with real use cases, a couple of them, where we have been able to kind of make an impact and show the value of that experimentation in a very small setting. So we did not ask for funding a huge team. It was a very, very small, lean and mean team of 5 people that we had. And we were able to demonstrate very quickly that this kind of a capability is valuable for the organization. In fact, I'm really proud now that, we've had a run of about 2-3 years now. And the team has grown, especially with the emergence of AI as a dominant technology in solving a lot of problems at Unum. We have demonstrated, and there is now a growing recognition of the need for these kind of capabilities in the organization. So it's getting a lot of high visibility. And with that visibility comes like a lot of top-down mandate from the C-level as well as investments and funding appropriate to, the kind of projects and the complexity of projects that we're going to be taking.
So when you think about that first use case, then the very first one where you were actually able to have some success, how did you take it from an idea and then take it through solutioning? What hurdles did you have to overcome? Love to hear how it went from how the idea first came to be, how you decided that you should solve this problem, and then how you actually turned it into reality.
I think this, like I said, the whole Incubator team was stood up 4 years ago, and one of the first use cases that we picked was in an area where, and if you ask within the disability space that we are in, the claims process is fraught with a lot of variables, like a lot of, and you'll hear people say if each claim is its own, right? So that, which basically is a different way of saying there are no patterns that can be codified into rules. And with technology that was available up until then, right, which are rule-based systems, it gets very complex because there are so many nuances and so many layers of complexity in a claims decision that it is very, very difficult. And especially when you consider an environment where a lot of information that comes in is all unstructured. And when we looked at that use case, the big thing was really AI being able to solve that unstructured information problem. So whether it is computer vision that we use for looking through handwritten claims forms, or natural language processing that we use for processing pages and pages, hundreds of page medical record example. These were all things that were not possible without the technologies that we have today, right? So when we attack a problem, we are looking at what were some of the basic assumptions that were made before, which made a particular use case not solvable, and which of those assumptions are no longer true because there has been a step change in the technology capability that is available to us today, or just a very different way of solving a problem, right? So sometimes assumptions are very deep rooted in how things worked in an organization, and a lot of times those, over years, those assumptions are no longer valid, but those processes and that way of thinking sticks. And so it's really, as you kind of look into a problem and frame how you're thinking about the problem and solution, it's really questioning the assumptions, questioning what of those current processes are no longer true because of the availability of, some of the capabilities and technologies that we have now than what was not possible, many years ago.
Yeah, when you and I first met, you were talking about this term, and I love the word that you used. You said overcoming antibodies in the business. It's almost like antibodies in the business that you have to overcome. Could you speak to that a little bit and just how you think about doing that?
Yeah, I think, and this is not by intent, right? I think if you think about most organizations that have been fairly successful and have been in existence for a number of years, the natural instinct is to preserve and protect what has been working, which means, naturally you kind of build antibodies against things that seems very new or very, very disruptive. And that is a reaction to preserving what has worked well, which you should absolutely, as you kind of undertake any of these kind of initiatives, you should absolutely respect and recognize that. But also then, balance it with the right amount of challenging, some of those assumptions, like I said, right? So it is that antibody is almost, we within my team almost look at it as a checklist of things that we have to make sure we've got it covered, right? So when there are questions around what about this and what about this, right? Answer with data, let data kind of give those answers. And also recognize that sometimes it comes from a place of avoiding risk. And so and those are all things that you just have to solve for, right? So don't think of those as roadblocks, but think of those as problems that just needs to be solved and considerations that you need to have in your solution. But it's very true. Legacy is not, in my view, is not in systems. We talk about legacy systems. a lot of times it is those deep-rooted beliefs and assumptions that is ingrained in people. And that has come because they've been burnt before, some things have not worked before, and the process of really disrupting is challenging a lot of that deep-rooted thinking.
When you think about overcoming some of those antibodies in the organization and gathering data to go state your case, how did you think about what success was going to look like for that first use case? We were to stick on that one for a bit. How did you think about what the return was going to be for the business? How do you create value? Are there certain kinds of metrics that you used? Was there an intended value, or how did you define the outcomes that you could track it and actually get approval to move forward?
Yeah, so this project, like I said, was an AI-based project, and as you may appreciate, it AI-based projects are very different from how you would implement software, right? And there is a inherent uncertainty for a good part of the work that you're doing, and so the key was, how do you bring people along and show progress? Because the metrics that you observe through the life cycle of this project keeps changing, right? Initial stages of the project, you're really looking at model performance. You're looking at things like accuracy, automation rates, and so on. And bringing people along in terms of them understanding what these metrics mean and why they are early indicators of success or early indicators of the fact that we are headed in the right direction, right? So that was a big learning curve. And like I said, as we've moved from, observing the model performance in retrospective, bringing it into a more test and learn kind of an environment, and then to a more model office kind of an environment, we saw that the metrics that we started to kind of monitor change over time, right? So initially it was focused on a lot of model performance, and then as we moved along, it started to kind of focus on, okay, in a very controlled setting, what would be the business value that you can see, right? What is the caseload or throughput improvement that you can observe? What is the turnaround time, improvements that you can see? So you do test it out in a very, very controlled setting with a limited set of teams to see what the business impact is, or what the range of impact is possible before you scale out. So it was a very intentionally, drawn out stage by stage kind of a process where we took them and through each stage, the metrics that we monitored was different as it evolved.
And so the process that you followed was more where you had support for experimentation, and as experimentation showed results initially, you were able to keep more experiments going, and then ultimately turn this into something that the business could consume that provided a value.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the fact that you were able to pull that off, I think is pretty impressive, because I know at this point, one of the things around the AI, the hype that is happening is that most executives want to avoid disappointment, and many science project AI use cases that came out in the past, say over like the last 5 years or so, had a pretty high fail rate. So, love that you're able to share some of those results. I think if you were to give some advice to anyone who's more in that science experiment, type where we believe that there's ways to use data, we believe that we can show results over time. How quickly did you actually start seeing results and then be able to turn that into something that was a larger business use case to scale?
Yeah, I would, before I get to that question, Tony, what I would definitely say is you do need sponsorship for this, right? Because you're dealing with people, at different levels, as you undertake some of these initiatives, and without having some top-down support and very explicit sponsorship on this, it does become difficult, especially when you're introducing a new technology that is as opaque as AI is. That mandate and that sponsorship from senior executives in the organization becomes very, very critical for success. And we did make sure we had that. Now they did not blindly support it. They were also a little bit in a wait and watch kind of a mode. But as like I said, we were very, very diligent about sharing metrics, sharing what those metrics mean, and why they are directionally indicative of success in the long run. Now, to answer your question around how long did it take, I would say it took us about 6-7 months to get to a model office kind of a setting. So model office is our construct for where you're now done with the models are performing, but you now bring it into a very controlled setting with 2 or 3 teams to really evaluate what is the impact from a business perspective, right? So any of the operational measures, we were able to monitor it very diligently in that model office with a controlled set of teams. And that took us about 7-8 months. And could it have been faster? It could have. Like a lot of times, in organizations like ours, we also have challenges of data not being in the shape and form it needs to be. So there were some foundational challenges that we had to solve for some of our first use cases, right? So we did not have AI as a practice within Unum before that. So a lot of foundational things had to be set in place while we were solving for this first use case.
What role do you think change management plays in being successful as you're trying to scale a new kind of solution, change the way that the business operates?
Huge. I would say if I think about value from AI projects and AI initiatives, I would say a lot of that value is coming from the models and how accurate those models are and how much they're able to automate. But a good bit of that value is also, like more than 50% of that value can be attributed to our people adopting it, right? Because you could build the best model, but if it is not adopted, you don't see any value coming out. So and people adopt when they trust. And how do you make sure that people trust something that they can't touch and feel, right? And how do you bring them along this process is really, really crucial. So you almost have to architect for change right from the beginning, right? So we had folks that were part of the change coalition, right at the beginning, and they were helping shape what these AI products would look like. So right in the beginning, they would help us with reviewing, output from the models, give feedback. And as we moved along the various stages, that circle of change coalition increased. We brought more and more people into the fold. And these people then became, the voice for this product, right? As we started scaling, these became the change agents that spoke about this. So we as a technical team, we were radio silent. We were not, in the scale process, we were just letting folks that have used it and are really feeling good about it speak for it. And that is huge because people trust their peers, and the people trust people who are in similar places like them and have experienced the benefit of these tools, and that went a long way. So I would say you should not think about change management as a last leg in the adoption cycle. You have to start thinking about change and how do you need to architect for change right from the beginning.
And so you essentially took a role where technology was facilitating the success, but really making champions of the business stakeholders who would actually leverage the tools that you were creating.
Yes. And they felt a sense of ownership because they were creating it. And it reached a stage where the teams would basically talk about the tool as if the tool was their buddy. And they would say, oh, my buddy is right. I don't know why that specialist did something else. Right? So it was amazing to watch that transformation happen in front of you.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you got a great reaction from the business, and then you were able to go on to do some other experiments that were out there. And I love when you and I were meeting before to kind of prep for this call, you were talking about another use case and how you thought about the business in areas to attack. And there was something that you said that really stuck out to me, because you said we were looking for an area of the business that was underserved and that there was no way that we could scale a white glove type of experience or a better experience for those who are consuming a certain kind of tier of service, because there's not enough people that you would ever be able to hire. And so it's kind of an underserved part of the business. Could you speak a little bit to that use case?
Yeah, definitely. So this was the other use case that I was talking about, which was around customer retention. And this dynamic applies to most B2B companies, right? From a client number perspective, you have the largest number of clients in your less than 100 market. So if you are serving, all customers from one employee to 20,000 employees, for example, you have very few employers who are in that large case market, right? Most of your employers are in the less than 100 employee market segment. But what that also means is that if you are thinking about customer service, or you're talking about client management or account management kind of capabilities, serving that less than 100 market becomes very, very difficult, right? Because you know, for that to be economically viable, each individual who is a client manager or a customer service rep will need to have a much larger set of employers in their block for that to be economically viable. But you can't afford to do that because, you know, some of those employers are much smaller, right? So from a profitability standpoint, that would not make sense. You know, from a earnings per employer standpoint, that would not make sense. So the problem in hand was, how would you create a low cost economic model for serving this less than 100 market segment, where you can have customer intimacy without necessarily having, you know, that be people based, right? So it's not because I serve these 5 customers and I know everything that I need to know about these 5 customers. It is about, how do I have information and how do I have the data and insights, and how do I serve that up to the individuals who are in those roles, without them having to keep everything, you know, in their heads. But it's mostly where technology and people work hand in hand to build that customer intimacy, right? So that really was how we thought about it. And so if you can have just 3 or 4 people serve 80,000 of your less than 100 employers, and you can do that, where providing that right data and right insights is what builds that customer intimacy, that can go a long way from, you know, in improving, you know, persistency and reducing churn in that customer base.
So you mentioned 3 to 4 people servicing 80,000 accounts or somewhere along those lines.
Yeah.
What type of difference did it make once you applied, you know, AI related technologies to this problem? Was it you were able to reduce the churn rate by a certain amount? Was it you were able to touch more accounts proactively with technology and with people? How did you think about, and what was the actual value realization that you saw?
Yeah, I think so. The direct impact was on churn rate, right? So the termination rate reduced almost by 4 to 5%. Right. That was really the impact from a persistency standpoint. But what I also feel really good about was we don't have dedicated client managers, you know, for that in that market segment because of the reason, you know, that I mentioned, which means you're not actively farming that market segment for additional business, cross-sell, upsell opportunities, and so on. You don't have anyone focused on managing that client relationship, right? So those, you know, anytime the customer had a service issue, it was handled in a very transactional fashion, right? So you have a contact center, people call in, the person on the contact center is thinking of it as a transaction, is not thinking of it from a client relationship standpoint. And what this did was it took out, and we created a retention unit of 3 or 4 people from different areas within the business, like the billing and policy area and so on. And that pod, so we created 2 pods of those individuals, and they were helping with all these retention related service issues. And the impact that it had on the employees was what was even like this was something we did not expect going in, right? And these projects have always thrown these kind of curveballs where the individuals who were in the retention unit, their ESAT just went off the charts because, and the reason they loved being in the retention unit because for the first time, they were not being reactive to a customer issue. They had the opportunity to be proactive. They had the opportunity to reach out to a customer even before a problem became a big problem, right? And solve the issues for them. And so their job satisfaction really, really improved. In fact, as we did this, like people were upset if they didn't have an opportunity to rotate within that retention unit, because it was like, you are depriving me of something I want to do. It was amazing.
I don't think anyone's ever said that in the history of jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you go, so again, like I said, this was a surprise. We did not go into this project thinking this would be the outcome. But it was amazing how, for someone who is in the customer call center and day in, day out, all you're hearing is complaints and things that are broken, when they have an opportunity to be proactive and serve the customer, what it does to their own morale and to their own job satisfaction. That was really amazing to see.
That is amazing. Because you think about that type of work, and the burnout rate has to be high,
yes,
dealing with the stress of the kinds of situations you're dealing with on a daily basis. And if you tie that back in with the talk out there around AI is going to take jobs or is it going to augment people, you did a situation where you improved a job function so much with the AI that people are literally fighting to go have that job versus the ones that don't have it. And that's extraordinary.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and we are now, extending that use case to think about how can we use that same information? Like, what if in the contact center, anytime I'm picking a call, I know exactly where this employer is. So that this does not become a pure transaction where someone calls for an issue and fixing the issue. This becomes, I know where this customer is in terms of their, propensity to churn or their happiness index, and I'm able to deal with them appropriately, right? So this is like arming them with that information, which should really make their response to customers so much better. So yeah, there's so many tentacles to this particular use case, Tony, that we have barely started to scratch the surface on this.
Well, Preetha, I love hearing about the success that you've had so far, building upon everything that you've already done over the last 2 to 3 years. What's next for you in Unum?
A lot. I think we are early in our path for Gen AI. I know Gen AI probably unleashes a lot of capabilities. We are still trying to kind of figure out what are the right use cases. We have tried some. I do see the potential, but how do we deploy this technology very strategically where you're able to get some big wins early on is going to be critical. So we have tried a few experiments, but taking that at scale is definitely something that we're looking forward to. I also do believe that this is one more tool in our toolbox, right? And so not looking at these problems as AI, Gen AI, but as a holistic set of tools that you can deploy to solve problems. Like that's kind of the mindset that we have. We are looking at some very interesting use cases in the underwriting space. So I spoke about the whole problem on the claims side where you're getting information in all shapes and forms. That same problem manifests when you're writing a new business on the underwriting. And how can you now that problem is, your ability to ingest highly varied, highly unstructured information, you kind of starting to crack that code with Gen AI and AI. That unleashes a lot of opportunities in the new business underwriting process as well. So we're super excited about that. And I think about insurance. I feel insurance was probably the industry which had their first data scientists with actuarial science, right? And so I think about actuaries as the first data scientists that the world ever saw. And so it's ripe. It's very, very ripe for AI. Like if you have a process where people are making decisions, exploring how those decisions can be made better and faster, and how can you combine people and technology together to have a much more powerful value story is very exciting.
Well, Preetha, thank you so much for being on our very first episode of LiveAI. I love the conversation that we had today.
You've been listening to LiveAI. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. This episode is sponsored by Trace3. To learn more about why you should connect with them, about your enterprise practical AI use case, visit them at trace3.com or look for them on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.